Thanks for joining us this Monday morning. Um, uh, First, let me say briefly some words on NEREUS, Network of European Regions Using Space Technologies. We bring together, we offer regions a platform to work interregionally, and the focus is on the use of space technologies. In this context, we mobilized and realized a large flagship project, Copernicus for Regions, showing how regions use the European Earth observation Copernicus. And now this workshop series we put together on request of our members. They asked, they would like to know more of this new safety and security dimension of space. And in the second column of our interregional collaboration, where it's about interregional partnerships, networking, and mobilizing interregional collaborations, we also inform members on latest EU policy developments and programs. This webinar series addresses in particular the business community of our network, the aerospace districts, the clusters, to give them a platform to ask and get information on EU space policy and programs, but also to present themselves and interact with other players at a European scale. In this respect, we are very happy to have with us today Giacomo from the aerospace district in Piedmont, and to say something about your aerospace district. Today's webinar will focus on the synergies between space and defense and safety security. And we are very glad to have with us Barry Conray from the European Commission, DG DEFIS. Barry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. My name is Barry Conray and I work in DG DEFIS. And I will just focus a little bit on the action plan on synergies between civil defence and space industries. The objective here is to try and drive synergies, learn best practice from both from a defence perspective, learn from the civil experience, and also from space industry. If I could have the next slide, please. So the need to drive synergies has been well documented and well communicated by our president and also by our commissioners and by Commissioner Breton. And if I just in the context, I give some background here. In 2019, the president of the commission asked that our commissioners ensure cross-fertilization between civil defence and space industries, and also it called on a focus on improving the crucial link between space and defence and security. I think we all know that the defence industry, to some extent, is unique in its nature, and for many reasons, there are many barriers to entries. And our challenge here in the Commission is to try and remove some of those barriers to provide access to SMEs. In 2020, the Commission launched a new industrial strategy for Europe with the heading Reinforcing Europe's Industrial and Strategic Autonomy. By seeking synergies between civil, space and defence industries in the EU programme, we will make more efforts to use the resources and technologies and create economies of scale. But this is about trying to identify best practice from each other, and not only externally from an industry perspective, but also from within our own programmes, to make sure that they are actually accessible from different stakeholders. With this in mind, in 2021, the Commission launched its action plan on synergies between civil defence and space industries. And we are well on the way to implementing. We have identified many of the barriers that exist to entrance, and we're well on the way to working towards implementation. I will focus a little bit on defence innovation later, which is the area that we're most concerned with in DG DEFIS. If I could take the next slide, please. So the three objective headlines are enhancing complementarity between relevant EU programmes. And this is kind of internal synergies. promoting EU funding for research and development, identifying spin-offs. So good ideas that come to the defence sector, how can they be applied within the civil sector? And then, as we well know, many projects across the EU are funded in the civil sector. How do we identify those, what we would call spectacular failures or glorious failures in a civil sector, and apply those to the defence sector? There's a lot of work going on internally and also with stakeholders trying to identify, well, how do you best identify those projects? How can you bring those into the defence sector and kind of find a different application? Next slide, please. In overall terms, we have identified 11 actions to focus on, and I won't go through the 11 in detail, but I will speak about the first action, which is capability-driven approach across security sectors. The second action we have is identifying synergies between EU financing instruments. How do we kind of identify the barriers to the defence sector, for example, in our civil programs, and to what extent can we remove those barriers by staying within the legal parameters of the programme? The action number 6, which I'll go into in a little bit of detail, is a dual-use innovation incubator and cross-border defence innovation networks. And the final action that I will call out is the Space Traffic Management Initiative. So if I could speak a little bit about the Defence Innovation Scheme. It was launched in May 2022 and leverages Commission track record and civil innovation and making the European Defence Fund an attractive programme for defence innovation. We have 5 tracks that we aim to pursue. One is challenge novel ideas in hackathons and technological challenges. Second is test and accelerate ideas in EU defence innovation networks. The third is migrate innovation from civil to defence, and it's what we call spin-in calls. And number 4 is enhancing access to finance to scale up business. So this is what we're calling a defence equity facility. And the 5th track is finding partners and networks through matchmaking and joining European Defence Fund consortia, applying for disruptive and SME calls and receiving business coaching. So if I could have the next slide, please. So in terms of what we've achieved so far, on the policy side, you'll see that we have published a communication on the roadmap on critical technologies for the security and defence sector, and these are all available on our website. We launched that in February 2022. We've created a proposal for a regulation on the Union Secure Connectivity Programme for the period 2023 to 2027. We've released a joint communication on an EU approach for space traffic management in February 2022. And as I mentioned, the EU Defence Innovation Scheme in last May, which is well up and running now. In terms of civil defence spin-in R&D programmes, we've had a transfer of an existing civil 3D swarm simulator to the real world, implemented on fixed-wing drones. We have developed a standardized Galileo GPS navigation receiver, and we've recently kind of created design of a 5G based communication system that will allow new functionalities in defence platforms. And as I say, this work is being steered by Secretary General within the Commission, and all of the DGs and external stakeholders also participate in the implementation programme. Next slide, please. In terms of coming, I mentioned the November 2022. We've already launched a joint communication on cyber defence strategy. We've had a communication on EU drone strategy. The Commission recently announced the joint communication on military mobility, which aims at using technology, identifying kinks in regulation or barriers in regulation to help for the freer and quicker movement of military material and personnel across the EU. Our objective in 2023 is to release a joint strategy for space and security and defence. And we will have the first report of the Observatory of Critical Technologies. And also, we will continue to work on coordinating calls among EU instruments, and we're working closely with the EIB to identify how better to involve and provide access to finance to companies in the defence sector who are to some extent blocked out of funding from mainstream lenders. And we're continuing our work on possible amendments to the framework for dual use research and innovation. Next slide, please. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Happy to share with you the presentation and also some more detail on the European Defence Innovation Scheme that you can go through at your own convenience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry, for this very informative presentation and putting also the different elements together. To the audience, please share your questions in the chat. We are monitoring the chat constantly, and we will be glad to bring your questions to the floor, to the debate. You are too many. We can't see when you lift your finger. We have also some questions to you, Barry, but maybe we hear first the set of presentation and then have the discussion all together. If there are no immediate questions, I suggest we move on to the next speaker. And I'm very glad to have Paul Ancio with us from the European Commission, DG DEFIS. And Paul, you will tell us this morning about another European network, namely the network of defense-related regions and your work in this domain. That would be very interesting for us to link and liaise with your network. And in the preparation for this webinar, we also noticed that there are complementarities between both networks. We have several regions who are part of your network and who are also active in the space domain, such as Piedmont. We are glad to have Giacomo with us, but also Baden-Württemberg, German region Baden-Württemberg, French region Brittany, Belgian region Wallonia, and we hope to bring in the next sessions also other representatives to the floor. But with this, Paul, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Roya. Good morning to all of you. And I will, in a moment, share my presentation. And there is definitely a link to start off with the presentation that my colleague Barry just made on the Synergies action plan, because in the area 3 of that Synergies action plan, we talk about SMEs, we talk about startups, and how can we ensure more synergies between civil, defense, and space in this area. And the European Network of Defense-related regions is one element that was mentioned in that context. Are my slides visible in the meantime?
Yes.
Excellent. So this network is a network that the Commission launched in 2016. And initially, in the first years, it was funded under the COSME program, but today it is funded by the European Defense Fund. Let me go to the next slide. It's not responding quite well. Let me see. Okay, now we're there.
Now it works.
Okay, excellent. Basically, when the network was launched, we had 3 specific objectives in mind. And the first one being that the network should help to bring different regional organizations and clusters together to exchange good practices. Good practices on how can you sort of integrate dual use and a defense dimension into your regional development strategies. And that is something that is particularly important, for example, in the context of the European Regional Development Fund. If you want to benefit from that source of funding, you need to have this kind of elements into your smart specialization strategy. So that was one main reason why we started to bring regions together in this network. A second reason is that, of course, if you bring regional organizations, and I'm talking here about regional development agencies, regional innovation agencies, regional councils, but also clusters. If you bring them together, you know that you're talking with excellent intermediaries towards SMEs. So if we want to reach out to SMEs, of course, we can count on these organizations to spread the word. So we want to inform these organizations about funding opportunities that are available for defense-related companies. Of course, we talk now in first instance about European Defence Fund, but as I just mentioned, don't forget also about European structural funds being interesting opportunities for defense-related companies. A third element that was underlined by the European Defence Action Plan that was also launched in 2016 is that this network can be used to promote regional clusters of excellence in this area. Today, we have 49 members from 20 different countries, and we are still growing. And now I will explain a little bit more about the network and what we're doing. And I think, first of all, I would like to underline that I see the network basically as a platform where people can find information and exchange information. Some of this information is available to everyone. The audience, the general public, can have a look at our newsletters that are being published on our homepage. You can have a look at the news section, which will, of course, report on relevant developments and events in this particular area. But there is also a kind of intranet or private dashboard, as we call it, for our members, where they can exchange information on important events, on new strategies and regional initiatives, and put it on this particular channel. There is also the EU funding section where information can be found about European Defence Fund and other types of funding that is relevant for the members, but also even for people outside of the network. And members do have some visibility because every member has its own profile on the website, where they also explain or highlight to what extent they are defense related or they are involved in dual use activities. Now, the main driver, in my view, of our network are the actual conferences and workshops that we organize together with our members and that are taking place in the regions. So I'm just highlighting some of the most recent ones, like the one we did with the Andalusian Innovation Agency in November last year, and where we focused on cybersecurity and digital applications in defense. It was very important from a content point of view, especially as it almost coincided with the launch of the cyber strategy that was also mentioned by my colleague Barry. And in the end, we had about 100 participants from different member states. We had B2B meetings, which is very important for the companies that attend these meetings, especially the SMEs. When we can, we work together with the Enterprise Europe Network for that. But at this event, companies also had the opportunity to pitch themselves or to take part in technological challenges that were being put forward before the event by some major companies like Indra, Navantia, Telefonica Tech, and Airbus Defence and Space. And at the end of the event, we also had some interesting site visits to innovative companies. So what I here want to stress is the element of networking, which is self-evident for any organization that has network in its title, but for us, it's a vital element in our activities. For this activity, for this event, just like for the other ones that I will show to you, we have chosen to go for in-person participation. However, people could take part also in some virtual B2B activity. And then the event that took place last week even was taking place in Bordeaux. I understand that the region of Nouvelle-Aquitaine that we were working with is also one of your members. As you can see on the screen with one of the pictures, we had space-related entities taking an active part, like Ariane Group, that intervened in the debate. So here, as I said, we worked together with Nouvelle-Aquitaine to make this event happen. We focused on sustainable development for defense industries, but looked in particular at thematic topics like the life cycle aspect, energy, and a sort of cross-cutting dimension of skills. So we had like 90 participants, again, from different member states and Norway. And there was some very fruitful discussions, and on the ENDR website you can have a look at the outcome. There is a recording of the event, and the presentations are also available if you are interested. Now I want to highlight some new opportunities in the first half of this year. So very soon, 2nd of March, it will be a conference that we will organize with the ED Aerospace Cluster in Lisbon. We will have a look at the opportunities and challenges in particular for defense SMEs. So we'll be looking at the role of SMEs in the defense supply chain. We'll be looking at how disruptive technologies can be an entry point to enter the defense supply chain. And as underlined already previously, matchmaking will once again be facilitated by the Enterprise Europe network. And then the event afterwards, which we will be organizing with the Czech Defense and Security Industry Association, will focus on the equally important topic of defense innovation. As you can imagine, we have now very important innovative technologies, disruptive technologies, artificial intelligence, big data, quantum. How can we accelerate the uptake of this kind of technologies by the defense sector? And we'll be talking about that. There will be presentations also on European Defence Fund, on the European Defence Innovation Scheme, Defence Equity, which Barry also mentioned. There will be once again opportunities for matchmaking, but also opportunities for companies to take part in demos and pitches. Basically, to sum up, I think we've done in the past a lot of events where there is also potentially, or even very clearly on the program, a space angle, where there are synergies with space. So we have that. We've had that opportunity in the past. It certainly will pop up again in future. We're now working on new ideas for conference that will take place in the second half of this year and first half of next year. So more information will become available soon. And now at the end of my presentation, I would invite Margarita to show you a very short video clip about the outcome of the event in Malaga, just to give you a flavor of what the ENDR events are about. So, Margarita.
Let me know if you can hear it. So I'm sharing it now. It's okay?
We celebrate today the 7th edition of the Dual-Use Technology event. We organized that together with the European Commission, DigiDefis, and the European Network of Defense-Related Regions. This conference aims to exchange views and raise awareness on the importance of the challenges of cybersecurity for European defense industry.
Para Andalucía es muy importante porque ahora mismo estamos inmersos en un proceso de transformación digital. Supone una oportunidad para las pequeñas y medianas empresas de Andalucía. If we really want to cyber protect our products and services, the only way to do is through three key pillars. First is investment. Second, we have to lead in terms of technology and in terms of innovation. And third, talent.
Actually, we are growing. We have the potential to become an international leader, but we need first to solve some internal alignments, cooperation mechanism, for example, avoid duplicity of efforts, or prioritize the capabilities that add more value for European end users, also international stakeholders.
At the end, you have to continue working every day if you really want to have maybe not the security, but have a big probability to avoid an attack.
So it's important to really scale up, from the local to the European level as well. So to create, first of all, the right investment instruments that can allow that. And the other important aspect is really public-private cooperation.
I think this kind of events are very necessary because they put Andalusia in the map of the technology. For Navanti, it's very interesting to stay here, and so we get to know the universe of different SMEs. All of these kind of initiatives are welcome from Telefónica point of view, because today it's impossible to forecast what is going to happen without the innovation pool.
Okay, thank you. Now we move on to someone really practical and from a region, Giacomo Martinotti. We are very glad to welcome. You are a Vice President of the Aerospace District in Piedmont, and your region is a member of the ENDR network and ours. And it would be very interesting to see and hear your vision on the synergies of space, safety and security defense. Why you think it's also good to be a part of both networks. And we are especially interested also in your viewpoints, bearing in mind that your region is very active in these domains, has a very strong industrial potential. We have worked many years with your colleagues from Thales, Laura Gatti, and her colleagues who are involved in concrete, who were in concrete projects for the European Space Station. And you have also many SMEs in these fields. So please, the floor is yours, and please share with us your viewpoints.
Thank you very much, Roya. Margarita, can you put on the screen? Yeah, thank you very much. Well, my name is Giacomo Martinotti. I am the Vice President of the Piedmont Aerospace Cluster. I must say that speaking after the Commission, the European Commission, is a difficult task, but we will try anyway. So let's see what is my region and what it represents in this context. We are in Italy, northern part of Italy, west-north part of Italy, in Torino. Torino has a big route, a deep route in the sky and in the space. The first triplane in Italy was designed and built in Torino in 1913. As let's say, an entity, we started to work on 2005, and in 2019 we became a more structured entity, like an association, no-profit association, and therefore a cluster. 2019 we started to work on 2005, and in 2019 we became a more structured entity, like an association, no-profit association, and therefore a cluster. 2019 we started to work on 2005, and in 2019 we became a more structured entity, like an association, no-profit association, and therefore a cluster. Let's go through some figure. In Piemonte, through a study of Politecnico di Torino, we went to the conclusion that we have more than 350 enterprises in this field. We have a revenue of more or less 7 billion euro and 20,000 employees, which are a significant figure, but let's put it in the European context, they are even more significant. Of course, this comparison have to be carefully in terms of, let's say, similar figure, but taking into account the ADS figure available, we can say that 350 enterprises represent more than 10% on the enterprises in Europe. The revenue represent more or less 4 or 5% of 27 Europe countries, and the 20K employee, they are almost 3-4%. And in terms of density of population, we represent 1% of Europe. Therefore, they are quite significant to understand the importance of Piemonte region in Italy and in Europe. In terms of who we are, let's say the two diagram in the second part of the slide say one thing that is important. We have 5 key players: Thales Alenia Space, which is of course very well known, Leonardo, Avio Aero, Mecha Air, Microtechnica, Collins, as a big player, very big player. But we have as well 19 companies which exceeded 250 employees, which is a very good number. But if you compare the people and the revenue, you clearly understand that there is a variety of SME, and the SME is the real important issue that each and every cluster should have in mind. Our cluster is a non-profit association and is an integrated system of companies, academia, research center, public entities, and trade association. This mix is very important to be effective on the territory, and we will see later on how. At the end, if we have time, I will mention another huge investment that is going on, is planned and going on now in Torino, which is called the Città dell'Aerospazio, Aerospace City. But we will see later on at the end of the presentation if there is time available. Next slide, please. On the skill list, you see that we cover a broad spectrum of activities from design to development and production in almost all the area of aerospace and of the aerospace actually. So I will not go through all of them, but you will have the presentation available. What I would like to point out is the mission. The mission of the cluster is very, very important and is linking to what we are saying today in this webinar. First of all, we have internationalization, identity. Identity is very important for SME in particular. Of course, big players don't need a lot of identity. They do have, but the SME are the main reason why they need an intermediary in order to have a voice at a higher level. The interface with the institution and third parties, the aggregation for integrated project, which is very important for the European project, promoting innovation, networking, extremely important. We are part of ENDR and we are very proud to be part of it. I must say that we are at the very beginning, therefore we are in the learning phase, but I see a lot of potential there. And promoting education we do normally. We have an active role in Europe. We are part of an expert group. We are, of course, in NDR, in ECCP, which is the the cluster, the platform of the cluster in general, and we are part of the transparency register of EU Parliament, because you must be there in order to understand what is going on. The focus is quite large and is connected to the variety of skills that we have. I would like to just point out one topic, which is the space, let's say, grip that we have in this focus. And let's introduce the space economy just after having have a look. Can you please go one further on, Margherita? Thank you. Just have a look at the stakeholders. Stakeholders are very, very important, because we have institutional authorities, academia, association, research center, and key player and SMEs. In essence, we have the full spectrum of the player in Piemonte, and therefore we can have a link to the nation and the Europe and the entire world dedicated to these activities. In terms of space activities, of course, we would like to underline that apart Thales Alenia Space, which is very well known everywhere, we do have other big companies, or very important companies, like Altec, Argotec, Taiwak, LMA. These companies are expression of a very high level of excellence in the aerospace. I would just mention one very important mission that was very well known in the newspaper, the DART mission for NASA, where the asteroid Dimorphos hit, diverted its trajectory. The participation of Turin industry was very large, and in particular one small SME, one SME called Argotec provided the Lycia cube, which is the one that took the picture of the hit. Now let's move a little bit to what is the environment in the space. I think that we have a lot to think and do about it in a number of directions. Let's remember that Elon Musk is the point of a change, is the breakthrough. But before Elon Musk, Bill Gates tried in 1990 to have 300 satellites launched in the sky for the internet. And the project was called Teledesic, and failed because of the cost at that moment in time. But someone later on did, and this was SpaceX. Now, Le Monde recently said that the race, the space race, is the new Far West of space. And it is something that really brings to us, let's say, an issue. The space economy is, let's say, very, very extremely important for the future and for the geoeconomy and the geopolitics. We have, let's say, three figures. We can say three figures just to give an order of magnitude, even if, of course, they are only order of magnitude. Today, we are almost 0.5 trillion as a space economy. In 2013, almost 1 trillion. In 2040, 1 trillion and a half. I've taken the two extreme for 2030 and 2040, but I think they are reasonable. Of course, they are figure that give you only a rough idea. As George Boxer was saying, the statistician from UK, all the model are wrong, but someone are useful. So let's say what is the inflection point? The central role in supporting global security and sustainability of the space is very clear to everyone, and therefore it is a very high priority for all of us, in particular for Europe. but the boundaries between security and defense are very blurred, and therefore we have to consider this very carefully and see that each and all activities in the space are sensitive and vulnerable. Based on this, I really want to underline the point that we should go, and I believe that the Commission is taking into consideration this point quite well, the dual use for European research and innovation projects. Because otherwise we can see that we will have in the future pointless double effort. Of course, dual use doesn't mean total use. It means dual use. And this is one point of attention. The other point of attention is the existing framework, which is no longer efficient and sufficient. We are stick to the Outer Space Treaty 1967, so we are there is a lot of work to do in that area. And the model of the business is a shift from a monolithic to a distributed architecture. So there is something that we have to take care. And the last consideration is that the possible decoupling of cost and price, which is a very important issue that we don't have to explore today, but we have to take into our mind. Therefore, in all these aspects, I believe that the cluster may have a word. Why? Because they bring the voice of the territories. And the territories in terms of region is very important. In Europe, in the 27 member states, we have 329 regions, but some of them are very important in the aerospace, other less. We can say that we have 1,500 almost cluster located in 200 regions. So the cluster really may use their influence to help the Commission in the discussion that we have simply touched based early on in these comments. So the European cluster policy may use cluster to implement EU priorities. This is something that may happen in the future. Last word, as I said, it is on Città dell'Aerospazio. Where we are located in Torino is already the area of the Città dell'Aerospazio. Few figures to say to you the magnitude of this project. We are talking about one project that will require 1.150 million. So more than 1 billion investment. We will cover 13 projects on a land which is 1 million square meter, including an airport, and 200 square meter in terms of building. So it is a huge investment devoted to aerospace, and where we will concentrate all the attention of the region in this marvelous and fantastic topic. In terms of participation, I feel that ENDR is very, very important, and is growing very, very fast. And after the strategic compass, I think the growth will be even bigger and the importance will be even greater. Thank you very much. I give the floor to you, Roya. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Giacomo. You highlighted several important points that we maybe can also follow up in the discussion. What important takeaway I take from your intervention is that if we speak at a European level of strengthening, developing Europe's capabilities and capacities to use space-based services, increasingly also for safety and security purposes, and to build up also the commercial side of this business, clusters play an important role because they are in a way anchored in regions and have the access to the business community. And there I like to ask the two representatives from the Commission. You presented very illustrative your activities. How do you see the Interaction Commission and in their policies when they now work on changing and strengthening this framework, the role of clusters? Maybe Barry or Paul like to take the floor.
I'm happy to kick off, and maybe Barry can jump in later if he wants to. I think the role of the clusters has been underlined by the Commission on many times. I mean, if I look at all the actions that have materialized in recent times, I think that for itself is proof of that. There are the activities in the context of the European Cluster Collaboration Platform, the Cluster Excellence initiatives, also the funding that is available to bring clusters together and to make them, let's say, work together, or to give them at least an incentive to work more closely together. That's also there. The most recent program having been the Euroclusters, which is supporting partnerships between clusters from different countries. I think what you see now is also that defense-related clusters are also materializing more and more. And I would say that in the past, they were probably already there to a large extent, but it's becoming more and more visible. Also because it's probably more and more accepted in view of the focus that is being put on defense at European level. If I can just, it's maybe a little bit anecdotal, but I think it makes the point. I remember that a number of years ago, my colleagues from the European Defense Agency did a study, like a mapping, on how many defense-related clusters do we have in the EU. And I think they came up with a list of more than 100, but at the same time, they noticed that many clusters did not really like to be labeled defense-related. They wouldn't like, at that time, they didn't like to be seen as a cluster active in defense. I think all that has changed a lot in recent times for many reasons. Defense has become quite high on the political agenda, but there is also now quite obvious there is the funding attached to it with the European Defence Fund in the first place. You see what's happening in the world. You see the conflict, the war in Ukraine. So I think there are so many things happening that also the importance of defense-related clusters has come more and more to the forefront. Barry, I don't know if you want to say anything from your side.
Just two things. Thanks a million, Paul. Just two short points. One, the Defence Fund, as Paul mentioned, is bringing together collaborators across border with a focus on cross-border participation and SME participation. So that's bringing together entities that wouldn't ordinarily collaborate together in the defence sector. The other is through the lens of defence innovation, where through defence, as we begin to create and build out on defence innovation networks, there will be opportunity for innovators in the defence sector to meet with civil counterparts to kind of suppose bring forward ideas, projects, technologies in a collaborative manner. So early stages on the defence innovation piece, but I think it's so far a good start.
Thank you, Barry. Any other comments to the point of clusters? I see other cluster representatives here. Do they wish to comment? Okay. I have another question for Giacomo. In the video that we saw by Paul, the representatives from Andalusia highlighted 3 points. We need to make better use of dual use. We need investment. We need technology and innovation, and we need talent. if you, with a perspective of, from an SME perspective, where would you say should policymakers such as the European Commission, but also others like ESA, put their emphasis if they want to support, if they want to change things for SMEs in Europe to make better dual use?
Yeah, it is an important question. Honestly, so far, we did spend a lot of time to understand the various phenomena. If I remember, some times ago, in a very important arena, we did spend a lot of time to understand how we can use the word reciprocity. And now we are talking about sovereignty. Now, I think that technical sovereignty is important, and therefore it doesn't come as a free lunch. We have to do something to improve it, and this something to improve it must take into account that when you talk about SME, you talk about people that are working very hard, and they have let's say very few time left for extra activities and limited resources to participate. Therefore, you have to invest in making them visible to the large auditorium. And this is something that has two sides. The first one is to participate actively to the real renaissance of, unfortunately, I would say, a renaissance in these activities. But nevertheless, you buy the umbrella when it doesn't rain. Therefore, we have to prepare ourselves for this. And second, we have to, let's say, to be more careful about the voice of the cluster, because, as I said, the voice of the cluster is the only way to hear what SME may say. And believe me, to let's say to make them reactive, it is not really an easy job, because, as I said, they have limited time and limited resources to give attention to all the rest of the world. For this reason, I guess that in the various aspects of this new arena of development and space, they may have really a big role to play. And they could have a voice as well. Because when you talk about framework, regulation, and these kind of things, everyone should say something. And the cluster, to my eyes, they should do it. This is what I can add to what I said.
Many thanks, Giacomo. I see now in the chat we have a question from Mathieu Bataille from the European Space Policy Institute, and he asks, how are PESCO projects integrated into the implementation activities of the action plan on synergies, and how is the participation of these regional organizations and SMEs in these projects? Maybe one of the representatives from the Commission can react.
I can start, and if Paul wants to add, I suppose really there's a linkage between PESCO and the European Defence Fund. So that's the link between the action plan and synergies and PESCO, if I put it that way. It's one step removed. So the PESCO projects, if they are approved for funding under the competitive European Defence Fund, they are entitled to receive a bonus based on certain criteria. They're also entitled to receive an SME bonus if they involve the participation of SMEs. The action plan and synergies, and if in particular action 6, where we talk about developing defence innovation and cross-border defence innovation networks, it's the funding that comes that is kind of approved under European Defence Innovation Scheme is approved under the Defence Fund. It's not new funding for Action 6 of the Action Plan and Synergies. It's effectively a kind of a channeling of the funding through the Defence Fund. So in a long-winded way to say that there is a link, but the link is drawn between action plan and synergy projects or defence innovation projects into the defence fund, which are then funded under receive a bonus under PESCO. So that's the linkage. As you know, there are different governance structures and legal parameters for both PESCO and for the defence fund. PESCO is an intergovernmental arrangement where member states make commitments to each other to develop collaborative projects. The defence fund is a competitive process where entities coming from member states pitch for and receive funding. Sorry for the long-winded nature of the response, but it's not a direct line.
Many thanks. Other comments to this point? No? Okay, then we can move on. Joseph Borrell, last week, the 15th European space policy took place in Brussels, and Joseph Borrell, the High Representative in the European External Action Service, highlighted that there are about 5,500 satellites in orbit, and about 10% are really strictly for military use, but in all other many cases, we talk about dual use. And NEREUS is about a little bit this transformation process from the satellite imagery to useful information for citizens, companies, and public users. And one of the things in the intervention of Borrell that stood out that he said satellite imagery and communication have proved to be a game changer in the recent threat the world is facing in the war with Ukraine. And this makes me the link to our next speaker, who will shortly intervene on the EU Space for Ukraine initiative by the EU Agency for the Space Program. I'm quite glad to welcome Vasilis Kalogiou. Please, the floor is yours to present and share some words on this interesting initiative.
Thank you very much, Roya. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vasilis Kalogiou. I'm a Space Downstream Research and Innovation Officer at the EU Agency for the Space Program, EUSPA. I would like to take a hook for what you just said, because I followed the whole discussion. I would like to thank the previous presenters for the presentation and discussion, which I found very interesting. And just to make the connection with respect to what I wanted to present, and what you mentioned about actually the proliferation that we see particularly at the Earth observation market right now. Is amazing, and the role it plays in a conflict which is now still under development and is ongoing. Imagine that some years ago we wouldn't be able to see very high resolution satellite images on the news and the newspaper, you know. And right now we are at the stage where not only we can, but sometimes they can be even used to support certain, you know, narratives. So we understand the importance. We would like, as EUSPA, in our market development activities, for sure, to work with SMEs. It was mentioned before the crucial role that they have. We know that as a definite number, SMEs in space are growing. So we see this grow. We have more number, but this is, a tricky KPI to note, because we also note fragility. More SMEs, but very fragile market there. And we see SMEs entering into the market with a mindset into the civilian use cases of space, which are very important for sure, but later on shifting into the defense application. This happens a lot with Earth observation companies, specifically data providers, I would say. So with this, and another thing I want to say about the boundaries, of course, we like to define our activities usually under, defining spaces on what is security, what is internal security, what is external security, what is defense. But the problem sometimes and the challenges we face go transversally into this. And I think also Mr. Martinotti mentioned before about the blurring between this the different sectors, let's say. So we at EUSPA, I would like first to say a couple of words because maybe not all of us know our agency. EUSPA is the EU agency for the space program. It was officially established with the EU space regulation in 2021, regulation 696, which also established the EU space program. And of course, it's not that the Union didn't have an EU space program before. We just did have the different components independently being developed. And now the regulation of 2021, 2 years ago, put a bit of neatness, a bit of regulatory, let's say, cleanness, putting them everything under one umbrella. The EGNOS and Galileo activities, the Earth observation Copernicus program, the GovSatcom, the SATCOM component, which will be in its infancy now, will probably become and be more extended into SATCOM, the IRIS-2 so-called program, and the SSA component, which also will be evolved as we hear. And we will have a little bit of role as EUSPA in all of these different activities. Of course, our role, since we come from the European GNSS agency, is a bit more, I would say, important and relevant with the EGNOS and Galileo, which is the components that we come from. We were established on top of what was before the GSA agency, but we work also now on Copernicus and market development activities, and also on the GovSatcom user-related aspect and coordination of users. We have currently a project called Entrusted. We have many governmental actors being involved, and we have this network of users which we will try to evolve. Now, as regards specific activities, which is the reason of this intervention that you were talking about, I would like to say a couple of words about the EU Space for Ukraine initiative, which really started as a first, I would say, discussion among us what we can do with an eye on the market, how we can bring together different actors, starting from, of course, NGOs that are at this point and now continuously helping in Ukraine and help us and volunteers with the innovation part. So we launched the initiative last year in between March and April. We performed some matchmaking events. We performed a hackathon, which we had SMEs participating, hearing to what NGOs and what problems they had on the field. And they try using EU-space data, Galileo and Earth observation, Copernicus specifically, proposing some solutions. So we had the winners. And we had also some tangible results, apart from, organizing a hackathon and having some winners. What does this bring apart from, spillover effects, let's say? So we have a new venture being created because of the initiative, and we follow up with the participants of the hackathon. And we're now organizing a demonstrator where we would like to show practically some of these solutions. We will have an online event on the 2nd of February, where we will sit together online with NGOs and listen from their activities in Ukraine right now, understand their problem, and then work on it with some solution providers and SMEs to try to matchmake, let's say, this and demonstrate space solutions. Another point also, again, providing some practical examples of how we as EUSPA are active, along with our colleagues in DEFIS on this field. We will have a hackathon, a Cassini hackathon. You might are aware of Cassini, the initiative of the Commission to push entrepreneurship and support SMEs. We will have a hackathon at the end of March, 24, 26 of March, and the thematic is relevant. It's called Space for Defense and Security. SMEs will work on 3 different challenges that we have co-defined along with our colleagues in DEFIS. One challenge is on cross-terrain mobility, making scenes more secure. It's the other challenge. And the third is on protecting critical infrastructure. So we want to see what SMEs have to propose. Of course, these initiatives are, let's say, part of the bigger puzzle, but I would like to mention it here. And apart from that, we also are other tools on the research and innovation, let's say, portfolio. And one of these tools is, of course, Horizon Europe. And we are currently having a set of 6 topics open. And maybe the most relevant one to the discussion we are having here is the pre-commercial procurement topic that we have. We have discussed it with Roya. We had dedicated a webinar on this pre-commercial procurement topic when we try to leverage the importance that public actors, regions also specifically, have in utilizing, in uptaking space technology. Specifically, the topic is on Copernicus and Galileo, and how the public sector can act as a user. And we will, by the way, have also a follow-up event on the 6th of February, an online webinar to discuss a little bit more about this opportunity. I think I'm closing here this short intervention. But of course, we are an agency which hears from the users, and this year we plan to have also some activities specifically on the security and surveillance market segment. Maybe our upcoming user consultation platform will touch upon these activities, and we will have users, in the room to hear a little bit better from their needs, and then build some downstream applications on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Vasilius. And I think with the clusters as entry points, you have also now a good channel to really promote forward this information. Now, being really at the local and regional stage, looking what does it concretely mean dual use for SMEs for their way doing business, I go now a little bit more back again to the political level. As I said, last week we had the European Space Policy Conference, and Commissioner Breton, in highlighting the priorities for this year, stressed the EU space strategy for security and defense. And one aspect of this expected strategy is an enhanced use of space for security and defense operations. I think in all previous intervention we have heard today, dual use is more and more upcoming. And in this, I like to have a question, or like to see also that Dimitrios Stroikos shares his viewpoints with us. Dimitrio, you work at the London School of Economics in the Department of International Relations. You are head of the Space Policy Project. And what would be interesting to hear your viewpoint on is, if the European Union makes its strategy for an enhanced use of space for security and space operations, how could that impact our relations with other space powers? When we realize large space powers, large space initiatives like international space stations, but also launching satellites, we interact with other space powers like Russia, like China. How do these new approaches of the Union impact those relations?
Hi, thank you, Roya, and hi, everyone, and thanks for all the presentations. As Roya said, I'm based at the London School of Economics. I'm an expert on space policy and strategy. Well, I have a few points to make. Obviously, the first thing is to address is that it's too early to say, right, given the transformation of the geopolitical environment. But allow me to highlight a very few points. The first point to make, and as Giacomo noted, is that the nature of space technology is inherently dual use. And we are seeing the growing blurring of the distinction between military and civilian space activities, as well as private and public spheres of activity. And as Vasilios highlighted, this has been, of course, evident in the war in Ukraine. Think here of the role of Starlink and satellite images from private commercial companies. The second point is that this process is compounded by the return of great power competition. And this is where Europe's role becomes a bit more important, but also more strategic. We have to think in more strategic terms. The strategic compass highlights the significance of the domain of space in this regard, as you are very well aware, and calls for steps forward to enhance Europe's space power. However, important here will be, I think, the interplay between a top-down and a bottom-up approach to space. So I think that the much anticipated EU space strategy for security and defense will be crucial in terms of aligning means and political ends. There is the need, in other words, for a sort of a grand strategic approach. Undoubtedly, Europe has the means, the talent, the industrial base, but the key issue is the political goals to be achieved. And this will also require cooperation with key allies. We also have to think the role of NATO in this regard. So without a well-formulated strategy that creates a common understanding of space challenges and threats and appropriate responses, both at the regional and national levels, an opportunity will be missed to adjust to a more hostile strategic environment. Thus, a comprehensive approach is urgently needed. And of course, they should take into consideration how Europe relates its strategy with other great space powers, and of course, how you adjust your policy and strategies towards China and Russia in this regard. So I would just leave it there. But this is also a question that I would have for the respective members of this panel. How do you think the EU strategy will align in this regard with all these activities? We heard about the role of the EU Defence Fund, the role of clusters, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitrios. Maybe I pass on the questions to the representatives of the Commission.
If I could just in terms of how strategies are going to align, I mean, this is one of the areas I mentioned that we're focusing on now internally within the Commission, which is policymakers from the different areas, the different directorates being meeting regularly with stakeholders, and also under the guidance of our Secretary General, who's pulling all of this together to make sure that when we put together strategies and devise strategies in one area, that we have an understanding of the impact on the other area. So, for example, I mean, in the defence sector, we're learning a lot from our colleagues in DG DEFIS on the space side, for example, in terms of enhancing financing to the sector. So it's effectively coordination internally to ensure that when we're crafting strategies, that we understand the impact and try and leverage off each other. Hence the internal work on the Synergies Action Plan and other initiatives. I'm not sure if Paul wants to add on that.
No, I think you said it. Maybe just from my side, I mean, this is a kind of topics that could also be addressed in the context of an event by the European Network of Defense-related regions. Just to clarify, so for the organization of these events, we rely a lot on inputs by our own members, so they are free to to make proposals on topics, things that are important for them as well. Have relevance for us and at the European level. As I said before, we have done events on space and defense and on dual use aspects in the past. This will continue to be important. So it is possible that in the future, one of our events will also be dedicated to this. But once again, we also do this in a dialogue with our members. And as a number of the members, we share, of course, with NEREUS. You never know that this topic might be addressed in our community as well in the near future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Paul. I see here another question to the Commission. About a week ago, Commissioner Thierry Breton announced a new action dedicated to an EU space law. Common rules on collision avoidance, safety and mitigation measures, threat assessment, resilience requirement, and a zero-D risk. Are all these security and defense funding programs and industrial policies that you mentioned already aligned with this important new legislative pillar, or will they be at least in the short term? Furthermore, don't you fear that these objectives could be hindered or restricted in some way by national governments' interests? This question was asked by Gianluigi Renzi from Relay Italy.
If I could break the silence on this, it's a very good question, and there's a lot in it. And also thanks for your kind words, Gianluigi. I see you've added an ups to your comment, but just in terms of how member states and the role of member states, we know that member states have competence in this area. And it is important that when we're putting together our strategies that we consult closely with member states and indeed with the entities that they also represent to ensure that we're not coming up with something that cannot be agreed with member states. So for sure, we have seen recently how member states, particularly in the defence sector, how member states will continue to try and ensure that their own sectors, their own industry are promoted by the member state and indeed can gain access to the European instruments that are available. So we're not doing this in isolation is the key message really from a Commission perspective. For example, again, I'll go back to defence innovation where we're, as Paul mentioned, promoting access of SMEs to our instruments and also on promoting cross-border collaboration on defence innovation. We're not doing this in a vacuum. We're speaking with stakeholders. We need to get out even more to speak with stakeholders to identify that, what we're doing is not running against the interests of those member states. So I'm hoping to some extent, that the policies we put in place, the objective is to make sure that they're aligned with those interests of member states. And yes, for sure, depending on geography and certain interests, member states will have different wishes, but our job is to try and find a balance between those wishes and getting in place comprehensive programs that don't run counter to member states' wishes.
Thank you. Paul, do you have a comment?
No, not on this one. I think Barry was very complete.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Giacomo, not to go, do you have any comments you wish to share on the question that Gianluigi raised, but it was more a policy related, but just to be sure.
Well, I may offer a question, a very simple one. What is a debris? And I am allowed to take one debris and to throw it away. I mean, we are talking about a huge framework environment. Therefore, I believe that there is a lot to do in terms of collaboration altogether to understand how we can react and do things in the space. There is a variety of questions which doesn't have any answer, and they should have it. And I think that in order to have this answer, we need to work to a certain extent globally, but first of all, at the European level. And to do this, I guess that we have to take into consideration the geopolitical aspect of each and every action. I remember you mentioned the Observatory of Critical Technology. I was there, and I did, which is still available, I guess, one input, and the input was saying, I would like to have let's say, the geopolitical evaluation of the technologies, because we are living in a difficult environment, and therefore we should have some consideration on the geopolitical aspect of it. And we were using the Miro platform. All of a sudden, all the Miro was populated by geopolitical, geoeconomy. Each and every post-it was mentioning geopolitical. So all these aspects are very important to let's say, to build a community which is stable and understood by everyone, because otherwise we run the risk of problems. I did mention the collision of dimorphos, well, which is a great benefit for humanity, because you may have an asteroid kicking the Earth in the future, but you may think about other solution for it. So we really need to have something very important, which is very, very difficult because of the context in which we are living. And the new context could be beneficial, really beneficial for everybody, and in particular for SME, because they would have some directions to go, and maybe some protection from the European community. I don't know if this answered, or Adi is adding something to the discussion.
No, thank you very much. And I think it's a very important point for reflection. In line with this, I have maybe a question to Barry. Could you say something about the Observatory of a Critical Infra for Critical Technologies? What you are doing there? Because not all everyone in the audience might be familiar with it.
Roy, what I might do is I might send you on some briefing on it, and you can share with participants rather than trying to go into the detail on it now, if that's okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Just in a nutshell, what?
Yes.
What
no, I can do that. I don't have the latest information on the OCT, but I can certainly put my hand to it and get it to you. Okay.
Perfect. Okay, with this, we come soon to the end of this morning's discussion. I think dual use is a reality in Europe, but we will have to look and reflect on it on different angle, and we are really on a long way. Also, we as NEREUS will put this topic up in our next events and look at it and see also what can we do from our side to support regional stakeholder, in particular clusters, SMEs, to really engage with these new developments and be optimally supported. You are anytime welcome to put a last question in the chat. I saw that Margarita put all the links for our next upcoming webinars in the chat. You are welcome to join. And in 6 weeks, 2 months, we will also have a new edition of this webinar series, Space for Safety and Security Purpose. You will soon have the program on our website, and we will be very, very glad to welcome you again. I like to thank for this morning our panelists. Thank you so much for your presentations. They were quite interesting, and for the reflections you shared with us. And with this, we all wish you a good day.
Bye-bye.